Hi, everybody. It's Jim Ostrowski back with the Liberty Moving podcast. I'm at Delaware Park basketball court in North Buffalo. Haven't been around in a while. I've been kind of busy with the day job, but I'll get back on track. There's a lot of stuff going on. I've got analysis of everything. I literally don't have time to do enough programs to actually get the analysis out there. It's going to be pretty short today. So a lot of stuff going on, the riots, the arrests, the presidential campaign. I've got takes on everything. And again, why watch this instead of not watching this? Because it's not like, I'm not telling, don't watch me, don't watch the other guys. I should watch the other guys, but you got to watch me too. Because why? Because comes to politics, I got 50 years in, 37 years as a trial lawyer. So you want to analyze the George Floyd arrest, you're not going to get a much better analysis than you're going to get right here. But I'm not talking about that stuff today. So, but just in case you missed the prior podcast, and again, I need 1,000 subscribers to get real, as far as being a real podcast. I think I'm at about 50 now. Let's get that up. The prior shows, what did we cover? Other than the introductory shows, got into it, I think, at about episode 4. We talked about the International Easy Pass. That's the solution to all this fighting about immigration. That kind of gives all sides a little piece of the action. I think it's consistent with libertarian theory, and this immigration issue has killed the liberty movement. It's killed us. The liberty movement is in competition with other movements. The left, Trumpism, the right, the alt-right, you name it. They all hammer libertarians. And Tucker Carlson hammers libertarians. So we're in competition with these people. International Easy Pass gives us kind of a way to state a reasonable position on immigration and then move on and attract other support. So I talked about direct citizen action, obviously, in the first few podcasts. We analyzed the payroll tax. I'll do that again. It's not turning out exactly the way I imagined, but we'll analyze that. Talked about Kamala Harris. Did a pretty good demolition job on her. They're hiding her, by the way. You already kind of knew that would happen if you'd watched my podcast. Did an interview with Gretchen Whitmer, who's probably the Libertarian Party's top local candidate for any office, NY 27. I hope it's 27. I get them mixed up. 26. It's the old Chris Collins district in upstate Western New York. We did an update on the pistol permit lawsuit, which I'm actually doing. So again, I'm not just a podcaster. I'm actually in the trenches, fighting on a daily basis for liberty. So today I'm going to do a couple of things. Just give an update on our effort to open up the basketball courts in the city of Buffalo, and Delaware Park is the biggest set of courts. You could see behind me that we weren't quite successful at that. This was June. We urged them to do it, and they've not moved. Apparently, they're never going to be open again. So I'll give you a flavor of my remarks on that. So, and then I don't want to give you, I promised an update on the lockdown lawsuit. There's actually been some interesting developments. We filed a motion. It's Lewis v. Cuomo, pending in the Western District of New York with Judge Siragusa, who's stationed in Rochester. We filed a 41-page brief in opposition to Governor Cuomo's motion to dismiss. I'll give you some of the flavor of that argument. So basically, what we pointed out in the brief, the failure to respect our constitutional rights has led to a catastrophe with no precedent in American history. This catastrophe is the direct result of the unconstitutional concentration of power into the hands of one highly fallible person, utterly unfamiliar with the facts on the ground and with the unique circumstances of 19 million people, whose errors are then magnified throughout the state in a manner that would be impossible if the Constitution's diffusion of power had not been flouted. We talked about some of the details, the unemployment, the economic disaster. And by the way, just to interject, this notion that, and I'm objective on Trump. When Trump does something that's pro-liberty, I'm for it. He condemned the generals in the military-industrial complex. As Cernovich said, he's trolling the left yesterday. It's hysterical. Trump sounded like me, like back in high school, opposing the Vietnam War. So when Trump's pro-liberty, I'm pro-Trump. When Trump's anti-liberty, I'm anti-Trump. I'm very objective about it. But this notion that Trump is somehow to blame for the virus, whatever. If you look at a chart of the severity of the lockdown in the United States, it not that far away from some of the other so-called similar countries. So that's all BS. That's all just the mainstream media. Now that we're in full campaign mode, pretty much everything you see on the network news or the cable news is a complete lie. I mean, we're going to go into that. In fact, I may do some experiments in just live tracking some of these shows and commenting like you're in my living room at night. Oh, that's BS, that's a lie, that's not true, blah, 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 blah. We'll get into all that. But the notion that Trump, the Democrats are creating this notion that Trump somehow wasn't tough enough. He's a fascist, but he didn't crack down on the lockdown hard enough. Obviously, it's mostly a state and local matter. Obviously, Trump was in favor of a fairly short-term lockdown, and then he wanted to reopen. But the bottom line is it's all BS. So I did some analysis here because I saw Gretchen Whitmer, that prototypical progressive control freak governor of Michigan. She was on bragging about Michigan today. But in our brief, which was just filed August 21st, in our brief I pointed out Michigan had a very severe lockdown. They're 9th in deaths per million in the U.S., but only 18th in density of population. Why would Michigan have a death rate if the lockdowns worked? Why would Michigan have a death rate that's worse than their density of population? You'll never get that from Morning Joe, and because there's actually one of the themes of my show, and I'm not just saying this, I'm gonna literally prove this. American journalism is dead. I wrote an article on Lou Rockwell explaining why progressives make bad journalists. It's kind of an expansion on my book. We'll get into this, but American journalism is literally dead. Very few exceptions. I don't want to take credit away from the few people actually doing journalism, but they're not out there on a daily basis. They're not working for the New York Times, the Post, the network, and cable news. That's what I'm talking about. Mainstream journalism, Associated Press. It's all dead. It's all fraud. You can't believe any of it. And I'm going to prove that. I'm not just saying that. I'm not just blowing smoke. I'm going to literally prove that on this podcast. So Tennessee, remember early on? See, I have one of the amazing things is I actually remember what happened like 3 months ago. I actually remember what happened 50 years ago. So do you remember when there was this controversy between Kentucky and Tennessee? Similar states, big long border. Kentucky was a little bit more fascist on the lockdown than Tennessee. Well, guess what? Tennessee ranks only slightly ahead of Kentucky in deaths per million, 197 to 181. However, when you factor in density of population, Tennessee is actually doing better than Kentucky. So this is the type of, this is actual journalism. In other words, I'm actually bringing true facts to the attention of in this case, Judge Siragusa, brief filed in federal court, but also now in the podcast. So the big news on the lockdown lawsuit is that Donald Luskin, who's a Wall Street guru, he supplies data to Wall Street firms. He did a study on the lockdown using cell phone information, very, very reliable information, not a lot of bias there. Where did people go? Where did they lock down? Bottom line is he concluded that the lockdown provided no health benefits whatsoever. In fact, there was a slight negative correlation. In other words, where there was more of a lockdown, the health problems got slightly worse. He wasn't blaming the lockdown. He was making that as an observation. Well, I don't know the gentleman, but I sent him an email. I said, could you throw in an affidavit in our court case? And he graciously said yes. So we're waiting for, I asked the judge for permission to file extra papers because of the passage of time, a lot of new developments. Waiting to hear back. I don't know what the judge is going to do. If I knew that, I'd have a crystal ball, I suppose. And then we're going to update all of our research because I think most of the data and new facts available now make the case against the lockdown even stronger than it was. In our brief, we also talked about the right to bear arms, which is an issue in the lawsuit because they locked down Brandon Lewis's gun store, the firing pin. Right to bear arms is a fundamental right. I'm not going to. Let me just get into the fact that we worked in the riots as a sort of feature of the lockdown because a lot of people don't know this because journalism in America is dead. Do you know why George Floyd was unemployed the day he died? Lockdown. Do you know that I think the shooter, the young shooter Rittenhouse, I think he was also laid off in the lockdown. So all this pent-up frustration, nothing for young people to do, including playing basketball, by the way. You're paying people to be unemployed, which is really idiotic. You notice that when this payment stopped, the unemployment suddenly declined. Wow. It's all in progressivism, a primer, by the way. The silly concept of paying people not to work. I always thought that was stupid. Way before I was a libertarian, I always thought unemployment. It's like you're paying people not to work, and a lot of the people I knew who got unemployment would suddenly get a job right at the end of 6 months. I used to call it like middle-class welfare before I was a libertarian. In any event, we talked in here about the right to bear arms is also critical in allowing citizens to protect themselves when governments are releasing prisoners and reducing the number of arrests due to the concern over the virus. There are also millions of unemployed, creating a risk of increased criminal activity. Riots have broken out in Buffalo, Rochester, various cities that you already know about. Police killing of George Floyd, a man laid off from his job due to the lockdown. Police agencies have proven notoriously bad at protecting citizens during the riots. In Los Angeles during the Rodney King riots, they simply went AWOL, leading to the beating of Reginald Denny. It is of utmost importance. It is of the utmost life and death importance that this court issue preliminary orders preserving and protecting the plaintiff's right to bear arms. No apostrophe for the possessive there. Apologize for the the proofreading error. So that's pretty much it. Let me read the conclusion here. How are we doing on time? It's pretty short. So here's the conclusion. I make some points I think are really important to keep in mind. In the complaint, when we filed May 15th, we warned about concentrating too much power in too few hands, lest catastrophic errors be made through hubris. Paragraph 79. We even quoted Hayek, who famously believed that no dictator could ever have enough knowledge of the complex workings of society to effectively run it. Among other things, they lacked knowledge of the unique circumstances of each person. The health emergency dictators never heard of a man named George Floyd and didn't know or care that he'd lost his job due to the lockdown. It was not in a good frame of mind on May 25th, 2020. I quote from an article explaining what happened to him that day. The central planners could not conceive of the stress, worry, depression, and exhaustion that ordinary people would suffer from after months of being locked down for the first time in their lives, or the lives of Americans in living memory. They could not know how millions of unemployed and idle persons, deprived of their normal pursuits and forms of solace, would react to the tragic death of Mr. Floyd, or how protests turned to riots and riots to carnage, racial unrest, political instability, and assault on the White House, and a cracked pane of Constitution embossed glass at the Robert H. Jackson Courthouse in Buffalo, New York. When we engage in radical and reckless experiments in casting aside constitutional standards and traditions of liberty that date back to Magna Carta, we take a great leap into the unknown like a gambler spinning the roulette wheel in Las Vegas. Around and around and around she goes, and where she stops nobody knows. It may not even be possible at this point to put this nasty new totalitarian Pandora back in her box, but we urge this court to make a Herculean effort to do so before it is too late. So that's the type of legal writing I do. It's not common, and it's not common among law firms. Let's put it that way. So I'm just going to end here and just reprise some of the remarks I made on June 10th here, begging the city to get kids back on the basketball courts, instead of in the streets, instead of in basements, playing on their cell phones. Sun is good, exercise is good. I'm not going to belabor all those points. So what I said on that date, the law courts are open, but the ball courts are closed. The tennis courts are open, but the ball courts are closed. The bars and restaurants are open, but the ball courts are closed. The restaurants are open where young people wash dishes in hot, stuffy rooms, but the ball courts are closed. Basketball is America's greatest team sport, but the courts are closed. This is the first time in human history when adults who had their youth are depriving young people of theirs, and nobody cares. Athletes hardly ever get sick from the virus. Basketball players are the best athletes on the planet, but the courts are closed. They closed the courts for 2 weeks, 3 months ago, now 6 months ago, and won't say when they will reopen. Fresh air, wind, and exercise and sunlight are bad for viruses, but the basketball courts are closed, so young people are stuck inside watching TV and eating junk food. Young, healthy people who are in good shape rarely get sick from viruses, but the ball courts are closed. People are divided. Basketball brings people together, but the basketball courts are closed. Politics encourages people to hate each other. Basketball teaches that you have to work together, but the courts are closed. The prisons and jails are open, but the basketball courts are closed. The prisons and jails where young men sit together in crowded rooms without fresh air or sunlight are open, but the basketball courts are closed. This is madness, ladies and gentlemen, and it has to stop. Stop the madness and open the basketball courts. Thank you. I'll see you soon.